Here is something that will bother you for the rest of the day. Pandora never had a box. She had a jar. A large clay storage jar called a pithos, the kind ancient Greeks used to store grain and wine and olive oil. The box entered the story in the 16th century when a Dutch scholar named Erasmus translated the ancient Greek text into Latin, reached the word pithos, and wrote pyxis instead. Pyxis means box. The error stuck, traveled through 4 centuries of Western culture, and is now so embedded in the language that the phrase Pandora's box is in every dictionary on earth. The woman at the center of one of history's most famous myths has been carrying the wrong prop for 500 years. That is the kind of story Pandora's myth actually is. Full of details that got twisted, meanings that got lost, and a woman who got blamed for something she was specifically engineered to do. So let's go back to the beginning. Before the jar, before Pandora, to the theft that made her necessary. Prometheus was a titan, one of the divine generation that preceded the Olympians, and he had a talent for getting into trouble on humanity's behalf. He tricked Zeus into accepting the bones and fat of sacrificial animals while mortals kept the meat. He stole fire from Olympus and brought it to earth hidden inside a hollow fennel stalk. He was, by every available measure, humanity's most dedicated divine advocate and Zeus's least favorite titan. Zeus chained him to a rock in the Caucasus Mountains and sent an eagle to eat his liver every day. Every night the liver grew back. Every morning the eagle returned. This went on for what the ancient sources describe as an eternity, until Heracles eventually killed the eagle and freed him. But that is a different story. The punishment for Prometheus was personal. The punishment for humanity was Pandora. Zeus went to Hephaestus, the divine blacksmith, and gave him an assignment: build a woman. Not a goddess, a mortal woman, the first one, shaped from earth and water. Make her beautiful. Make her irresistible. Then bring her to the other gods and let them finish the work. What followed was essentially the most elaborate and malicious gift-giving ceremony in mythology. Athena dressed her in silver robes and taught her weaving and craft. Aphrodite gave her grace and the kind of beauty that makes people stop thinking clearly. Hermes, notably, gave her a dog's mind and a thievish nature, along with the gift of speech specifically engineered toward lies and flattery. The Graces gave her jewelry. The seasons crowned her with flowers. Each god added something, layering gift upon gift onto a being designed from the ground up to be irresistible and destructive simultaneously. Hesiod, writing in the 7th century BCE, called her Kalankakon in the Theogony, beautiful evil. 2 words that were meant to describe not just Pandora, but the entire concept of women, which tells you a great deal about Hesiod's worldview and somewhat less about Pandora herself. Her name, bestowed by Hermes, means all gifted, a nod to the assembly line of divine contributions that created her, though there is an older, more interesting meaning. Before Hesiod got hold of the story, Pandora was a name used for ancient earth goddesses, including epithets for Gaia herself. In that tradition, Pandora meant all giving, a goddess of abundance who bestowed gifts on humanity. Some classical scholars believe the Pandora of the earth goddess tradition and the Pandora of Hesiod's punishment myth were originally 2 completely separate figures whose names happened to collide, and that the original all-giving goddess was gradually rewritten into the all-receiving mortal woman who caused humanity's downfall. That is a significant rewrite. From giver of gifts to receiver of blame in a few centuries of retelling. Zeus sent her to Epimetheus, the brother of Prometheus. Prometheus, whose name means forethought, had warned his brother explicitly, do not accept gifts from Zeus. Epimetheus, whose name means afterthought, accepted immediately. They married, and Zeus provided a wedding gift, a large jar, sealed, with strict instructions never to open it. The ancient sources do not agree on what was in it. Hesiod's Works and Days, the most complete account we have, says the jar contained every plague and evil the gods could devise. sickness, toil, misery, death in its many forms. Everything that made human life difficult and painful and short. All of it packed into a jar and handed to a woman specifically engineered to be curious and given to a man specifically selected for his poor judgment. The setup was not subtle. But here is where the tradition gets genuinely complicated, and where the story becomes more interesting than its popular version suggests. Some ancient sources, drawing on different threads of the myth, say the jar contained blessings. Good things, not evil ones. In this version, the calamity was the same, but the mechanism was inverted. When Pandora opened the jar, all the good things, honesty, health, abundance, joy, escaped and scattered across the world, too diffuse and distant for humanity to hold on to. What remained, unable to escape before the lid slammed shut, was hope. The ambiguity matters because it changes the entire moral weight of the story. In Hesiod's version, hope staying in the jar is a mercy, a small consolation that survived the catastrophe. But in the alternate version, hope staying in the jar is the cruelest detail of all. Everything good about human existence escaped and can no longer be grasped. Only hope, the belief that good things are still possible, remains trapped, sealed inside, never quite reachable. Both versions have survived because neither one was ever definitively closed off by the ancient tradition. The Greeks, to their credit, seemed willing to live with the ambiguity. There is also the question of whether Pandora opened the jar deliberately. Hesiod describes it as curiosity, a quality Hera built into her as one of her divine gifts, which means she was made curious and then blamed for being curious, which is exactly the kind of circular logic that tends to follow women in ancient mythology. Most ancient sources agree she was not malicious. She did not open the jar to harm humanity. She opened it because she was engineered to open it, curious by divine design, given a sealed container and told specifically not to look inside. She slammed the lid shut the moment she understood what was happening. The ancient texts record her shock as genuine and immediate, but she was a fraction too late. Everything had escaped, except the one thing left at the bottom. Elpis, translated as hope. Though the Greek word elpis carries a range of meanings that the single English word hope does not fully capture. It also means expectation, anticipation, the act of looking forward to something uncertain. And in some contexts, it means anxiety about what is coming. Whether elpis trapped in the jar is a comfort or a cruelty depends entirely on which translation of itself it is using, and the ancient texts never resolve that question. Hesiod does not resolve it either. He ends the story, looks up from his clay tablets, and moves on to a completely different myth about the 5 ages of humanity, leaving the question of hope sitting in the jar exactly where he found it. Pandora disappears from the story at this point, more or less. She and Epimetheus eventually had a daughter named Pyrrha, who married Deucalion, the son of Prometheus. When Zeus sent the great flood to end the Bronze Age of humanity, Deucalion and Pyrrha survived in a chest, came aground on a mountain, and repopulated the earth by throwing stones over their shoulders that became people. Pandora, the woman created to be humanity's punishment, was the grandmother of the only 2 humans who survived Zeus's next punishment. The ancient Greeks seemed to appreciate that kind of irony without needing to comment on it. Her story has accumulated layers in the centuries since Hesiod. The Renaissance painted her as Eve, the original temptress, drawing parallels between the jar and the apple and the woman blamed in both stories for the loss of a paradise men had been enjoying without her. Later poets made her romantic. Later scholars made her feminist. The 20th century made her a metaphor for nuclear weapons, for unchecked technology, for the internet, for any human innovation that released consequences its creators could not contain. The jar became a box. The box became a metaphor. The metaphor became a cliché. And somewhere under all of it is the original story, which is stranger and more uncomfortable than any of its descendants. Zeus wanted to punish humanity. He built a weapon out of a woman, gifted her with beauty and curiosity and deceit, handed her to the least perceptive man available, and attached a jar of catastrophe as a wedding gift. The plan worked exactly as intended. Then the tradition spent the next 3,000 years describing what she did as a mistake. That is the story of Pandora, a woman created for a specific purpose, who fulfilled that purpose exactly, and whose name became synonymous with the damage she was designed to cause. The jar was never really the problem. The jar was just the delivery mechanism. Zeus was the one who packed it. If you enjoyed this dive into mythology, like and subscribe for more.